Welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals podcast, where we have fun with practical application and we get mental with the science of behavior. Put them both together and you get results, solutions for your behavior problems, and the tools you need to achieve your training goals. I'm your host, Barbara Heidenreich. Let's talk training. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the podcast, Animal Training Fundamentals. This time, we're going to talk about how we merge research and animal training to improve animal welfare. And I've got a behavior analyst, and I've got an animal trainer and keeper coming together to tell us how these two worlds come together. A lot of times when we think about research, we tend to think about many different projects, many topics, and going in a lot of different directions. One of the things that I think is interesting about this study or series of studies is that there's been one objective the whole time. It's how do we get penguins to swim more? And it's ended up resulting in many different projects. And this has been going on for years. And I think it's really cool that we could put so much into this and it results in so many different great ideas that have been successful, as you'll see as we get talking in this particular podcast. So it's really inspiring that it's not sort of a one and done kind of thing. There's just so much wonderful work that can come out of this. So I hope you guys will get inspired. We're going to jump into it and let these two guys tell you all the ins and outs of getting research started at your zoo, because it kind of sounds like it's no big deal, but it can be really complex. All right, so let's get into the podcast and get to know Eddie Fernandez and Rickey Kinley.
Hey everybody, it's Barbara Heidenreich back with another podcast and special guests. I have Eddie Fernandez and Rickey Kinley, and I'm going to let them tell you their backgrounds because obviously they're going to do it way better than I can. Why don't we start with you, Eddie, because you are here with us in the United States now, but you have a brand new career, a brand new job, I should say, not no career because you're in that career already. But tell us about your new position and what you'll be doing and already are doing, I guess, really.
Well, unfortunately, I've had the job for over a year now, but because of the restrictions due to COVID, I'm still not in Australia, but I am a senior lecturer in the School of Animal and Veterinary Sciences, so in the vet school at University of Adelaide in South Australia. So I am a senior lecturer of applied animal behavior and welfare. So it's a senior faculty position there that, as I mentioned, I've had for over a year, doing all kinds of weird, wacky, applied animal behavior work. I'll be working with very closely with Nick Bishop at the Adelaide Zoo. We have some companion animal work with my colleague Susan Hazel, and so she's a senior lecturer there as well, and very much an incredible veterinarian research scientist, senior lecturer there, who is largely responsible for me being there now. And she does amazing companion animal work and some human animal interaction work. And I have a couple doctoral students I'm supervising there, or I'm co-supervising, and some conservation related work with the gray-headed Australian gray-headed flying foxes. We have a grant that we've put in that I'm one of the co-PIs on. So there's a lot of really cool work, but I'm sure there'll be stuff that comes out about it more so in our chatting. Otherwise, the simple thing to say is that I've been doing this applied animal behavior thing for a while. This whole applied behavior analytic thing with animals, depending on what we want to describe it as. There's a bunch of different ways we could describe it, but a lot of my work has just been doing animal welfare research in zoos, and then occasionally outside of zoos, like with companion animals and some field work. So, yeah.
Nice. And Rickey, tell us about what you do.
So I'm the head keeper of the aviculture department at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden. And I've been here for 28 years at the Cincinnati Zoo. I've started my career here. I'm going to the high school here called the Zoo Academy. So I've been here since I was basically 15 years old. I went to high school here on zoo grounds every day, working in various different areas for 2 hours, 2 hours a day or so. Eventually got hired on, and here I am. And another thing I do here is I go around and assist with animal training around the zoo, help do some problem solving, that kind of stuff. I've worked with polar bears, elephants, tigers, camels, manatees, like a bunch of stuff. When people have trouble, they give me a call and I come over and see what I can do to help.
And I got to say, I did listen to the Zoologic podcast that really went into your background, and man, I was jealous in terms of how you got to get started in the zoo career, going through that high school program. That sounded amazing.
Yeah, it was an invaluable experience. I mean, I think it's one of a kind in the United States for sure. Very unique in the world, where the school is on grounds. So just getting hands-on experience from years ago. I got my professional career in a zoo started probably 10 years earlier than the average person, which super cool, by the way. So I'm just happy to still be here and doing this. I've been loving every bit of it. So
yeah, I have to admit, I had a high school teacher that taught zoology. We actually had zoology in high school, and I still remember him to this day. Mr. Soule, shout out to Mr. Soule. He inspired me and actually helped me stay on a path of going towards that. But we didn't have the kind of experience you did, where you got to go to the zoo and participate and eventually, get a career in the zoo that way. I still had to go some more traditional routes after I graduated high school, but cool experience you had there.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons we have the two of you together, though, is because you worked on research projects together at the zoo. Yes.
Right. Yep.
So
lots of penguin stuff.
Yes.
Lots of penguins. And is that where you first met, actually, the two of you?
Kind of.
Yeah. It was destined to happen.
Of course.
Ricky and I, gosh, I don't even know what year that was, but it
2002.
was. Oh
it was
boy,
the ABMA San Diego 2002.
See, that's how I know Ricky cares. He knows. He knows it. He knows he it's like he's gonna state the day and time.
That's that little part of my photographic memory. I remember hanging out making fun of Kansas City versus Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri, or whatever.
Right. So I think the way that if I remember correctly, because Ricky and I had both just had articles the previous year, yep. I think so in 2000 or 2001, so 1 or 2 years before, we had both had articles in American Animal Trainer magazine.
Yep.
And so one of the article I had was one of the introductions to orca. At that time, orca
and
had
what's
been
orca, so people know.
Yeah. So that orca was a couple years old at that time. That's the Organization for Reinforcement Contingencies with Animals, which is the student-run group that I started in 2000, at the end of 99, 2000, as a brand new graduate student in the master's program at UNT. So I started that program back then and ran it for the next 2.5 years with Jesus Rosales Ruiz as the faculty mentor, and then had Nicole Dory come in and take over orca after I left. So that's how that got run, and it's still there to this day. So it's the only applied animal behavior focused lab within a behavior analysis program no, there's a couple now other than that, but it was the first. So Ricky and I had both had these articles, and Ricky had a whole article on training penguins in American Animal Trainer magazine, with these nice color photos of all these pictures of Ricky getting penguins to to respond to these different, what were you even using at that
They're
time
hamster
for the
balls.
training? Was it the hamster balls that we
Yeah,
used for
yeah.
our research?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
So he had the same devices. I thought there was like a frisbee or something like that you were originally training to, or
No, we used just plastic balls too.
okay.
But on
Okay.
the back cover had me holding that like yellow hamster ball.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I remember I saw Rickey at the conference. So that's San Diego 2002. And I went up to him and said, "You stole my research
You
idea."
did, yeah.
Said, we now have to work together.
Yeah, you're like, I
Um,
was thinking this. I've been thinking the exact same thing about
yeah,
enrichment and training, combining them.
right. Right.
That
So that was the idea, was just that, I mean, here in this example, what Rickey was doing, which was really amazing to see, was when you think about when you think of the modern zoo, there are two main behavioral practices that have defined the modern zoo for the past several decades, which is husbandry training. So all these applications of applied behavior analysis and operant conditioning, predominantly to get animals to do stuff voluntarily, to choose to be involved in veterinary practices and whatnot. So that's one of the big behavioral welfare practices, and the other is environmental enrichment. And both those areas have been largely exclusive. They've been there's no combination, or very rarely any combination of the two. Also, both very much started as behavior analytic practices. That's obvious, I think, to some extent with the training practices, the husbandry training, because many people know about the Brelands, and then, obviously we're talking about operant conditioning and using positive reinforcement to train animals to engage in these different behaviors. That's pretty clear. That's directly related to, Skinner's work and whatnot. But environmental enrichment is less clear. I think a lot of people aren't as familiar with the history of Hal Markowitz, who was a behavior analyst who ran what's now the Oregon Zoo. Back then was Metro Park Zoo and then Portland Zoo. So in Portland, Oregon. And he was what eventually became behavioral enrichment, and now we know it as environmental enrichment, was what he was calling behavioral engineering, because that's what in the 50s and 60s and 70s, really the 60s and 70s, I think the term was first coined early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, this term of behavioral engineering, which was an early descriptor of applied behavior analysis. And that's what Hal Markowitz was calling what he was doing, because he was trained as a behavior analyst. And he just sat there and saw these animals in zoos, like white-handed gibbons, said, I want to train these animals to do these natural behaviors that they should do. So that said, two very separate fields, not a lot of combination of the two. And Rickey was I had been talking a bunch about why are we not training animals to interact with enrichment items to get them to increase their enrichment activity? And then, so I had been talking to students about this, talking to other researchers. I show up and Rickey's giving a presentation on how he trained penguins to do this. Right. So I'm like, you just stole my thunder, man. What are you doing?
right.
So how did this turn into you guys working together then? Like, because that you make it sound so easy, but it isn't easy.
Well, he started cracking jokes, and then we were drinking.
Right.
And then
pretty
he's
much.
like, he was pretty much like, no, we need to work together. He's like, this is like, no one's thinking of doing this. And I was really new to the whole conference stuff anyway at this time. Like, that was actually my first presentation, is that at that ABMA conference. I ended up winning an award, I think the Animal Welfare Advancement Award. And it was, it was a lot of us new to our careers, and we're like, having a good time and enjoying, like, just getting to know each other and and sharing ideas. And, it was the infancy of the organization. So everybody's like excited. And then all the founders are around. So they're like, they're feeding this young energy, and everybody like this creative energy. And Eddie was like determined that we were going to work together. And I'm like, okay, I guess, like, I don't know really. I guess we can work together and do some stuff. This is all new to me. It was all whirlwind anyway. And Eddie ended up, and we stayed in touch. When did you end up in Indiana University? Because that's when it went from there.
Yeah, because I think that was kind of the nail in the coffin for deciding on my, I say that like it was a bad thing, but on deciding where I was going to my doctorate, because at that time, so I was just finishing up my master's at North Texas, and I was getting ready to leave Orca in the hands of Nicole Dory, and then head off, and I think I was still unsure of where I was going to end up. And I realized at that time I said, well, if I do, I was heavily leaning towards Indiana, because I really wanted to work with Bill Timberlake, who ended up being amazing, really honestly one of the most amazing researchers I've ever met, and was an amazing advisor. But I was leaning towards that. But then I realized, I was like, well, if I'm at Indiana, if I'm in Bloomington, that's only a couple hours from Cincinnati. And, we could do all this penguin research stuff. Like we could take what he's already doing and just apply, come up with the methodology and refine some of the procedures so that it works with research very well. And that's exactly what we did. So it was, I think it was 2003 that I ended up in Indiana, and maybe it was 2003, 2004 that we started doing the penguin. We'd spent a couple summers doing research.
Right. It probably was 2004 because we gave that presentation in 2004 in Baltimore.
Right.
Research.
Oh, Baltimore.
So so it probably was 2003, the summer of 2003, I think.
Yeah. So, and an important component of all this, I think a really important, I'm going to wait. I think I know where you're going to go with part of this, Barbara, about in terms of how this all kind of, I know we're making it sound like it's a little easier than it should be, but there's the politics of how you get research going in zoos. And so I'm going to hold off. I'll let you ask those questions so I can
you can go for it, because I'm happy to let it flow. I do have questions, but keep going.
Okay. So, well, an important component of this was just that. So Rickey and I were in our 20s, like Rickey was already mentioning, this is an important, there was a lot of energy there. And there was also a lot of conference activity, like a lot of alcohol, and we were just excited to get, there was a lot of fun.
I have stories too, but we'll just keep those on the down.
Right. Well, and that was really an important, I mean, Rickey and I we just, on top of coming up with these research ideas, I mean, I think every night of that conference, we were out at the bar talking about, like, when we weren't watching a presentation, we were sitting down in a hospitality suite or hanging out. Aside from making jokes and stuff like that, we were coming up with, how could we do this?
Correct.
Some of those, I'm sure there were some like sloppily written methods sections, or things written on bar napkins or whatever, where I'm describing procedures and whatnot. But we were coming up with this design. And by the way, it's worth pointing out, this paper was published a couple years ago. Finally, the peer-reviewed publication came out in Zoo Biology a couple years ago. So if you search for, Fernandez, Kinley, and Timberlake, or if you look, and I'm sure, Barbara, you can put a link.
We'll put the reference. We'll put the reference on the web episode page, or the episode page for this this podcast. Yeah. Yeah,
for the actual study that was done. That was, so there. What I was going to mention in terms of politics and whatnot, and how that, because it's always very tricky getting research going in a zoo. I had just started working with Indianapolis Zoo going into around 2003. And that was the first big zoo that I started working with. Because most of my work through Orca and at North Texas was with Frank Buck Zoo, which was a non-AZA accredited facility in Gainesville, Texas. Really great, smaller zoo facility. But Indianapolis Zoo was the first AZA accredited zoo. And there's a lot more hoops you have to jump through. And especially as an outside research scientist, and somebody who is just starting in the career, you can't just show up to some doorstep, right? Like I actually tried to do that and it didn't work out with a couple facilities. We had stuff in North Texas with both Fort Worth and Dallas Zoo, where after I had Karen Pryor come down to Denton and give a presentation, a bunch of the Dallas keepers, including some of their senior keepers, invited me to come out there and see their facility and come up with some potential research ideas, which I did. And then it didn't make it past management. In fact, management even got a little upset that I was even on facility grounds thinking of research before being in contact with them. So this is what I mean by the politics. And then Fort Worth Zoo, we couldn't get a research proposal approved through Fort Worth Zoo because they had, I was a no-name research person. I had no degree, I was just finishing my master's. They weren't going to approve those projects. So
that's a, interesting question, because these are behavioral things, and they are things that ideally we are hoping are going to, maximize animal welfare when they're not about putting animals at risk. So what do you think are some of the things that are roadblocks in those situations? Or is it more about maybe the time, this is a number of years ago, maybe things are different now? What are some of the roadblocks in those situations?
Well, I'll chime in real quick. The thing to remember is, like, training in zoos was still new at that time.
Right.
So, like, research is extrapolated beyond that. Right. So, there's a lot of risk when you say the word research, especially back then, because who knows what someone's trying to come in and do. And if you're talking about stuff that maybe is new to them, when training was new in itself, any type of operant conditioning was fairly new to a zoo, you had to really somehow build some trust. And I'll say in our particular scenario, a big part of the success is just because he had someone in on the ground floor, and we already got to know each other. And I'm like, this guy seems pretty smart. He seems to know what he's doing. I like him. We've hung out, we've debated concepts and training, and people like him. And I got to know Eddie enough that I'm going, and then I had to work that from the inside of the system.
Right.
And so that, and it wasn't necessarily easy, but I had to be diplomatic too.
Yeah.
And then Eddie had to bring up his end of the bargain, because if either of us didn't kind of navigate that well, anything could have sunk the ship, right? So
Yep.
And even as we were doing the research, there was a lot of walking around on broken glass too, right? And from my end, I knew I had to, obviously safety is always number one. And I have to make sure my supervisors understood that we were considering safety as number one through everything we did. And then Eddie would come in, and Eddie would be going, okay, can we do this? And I would have to go, all right, we're going to have to do it this way. And sometimes it would make it difficult, but it was like, we either have to do it this way or it won't. And so there was a lot of creativity and navigating, and at least on our end, on that, from the on ground end of the scenario, I had to be very diplomatic too, just to get Eddie through the door.
Yeah.
So that was a really big part of it. And I had to know how to operate within the system of our organization. if I didn't know how to do that, if I didn't have a good enough reputation, or, I just came in and said, hey, it's a good idea, someone should just let us do it. Well, that's not enough.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one of the things. So what I had the fortune of, so with Indianapolis Zoo, part of what allowed us to create the research collaboration that I started as I started my doctorate there, was Bill Timberlake's name at that point. So that was our in. So I went to Indianapolis Zoo and said, hey, I'm a new doctoral student. I'm working with Bill Timberlake. And here's what I had started to started to gain a little bit of a name for being a research scientist at that point, having finished my master's with Cincinnati Zoo. And Rickey was the key, Rickey got all this paved in this way that now, it was Rickey said, okay, we're going to come in and do this. And it made it, I mean, we were going through these hurdles at Indianapolis Zoo with putting in proposals, and they would take 6 months to a year. And here I had a direct line to management now through Rickey. And we had all the other, we had the entire birdhouse, well, most of the birdhouse on board. So we would sit down, and sometimes that's exactly like Rickey would just set things up where it was like, hey, let's just sit down and have lunch with the other bird keepers.
Exactly.
And I'd sit there and talk about ideas we had. And then Rickey could, everybody would be on board with that. And Rickey could go, okay, now I can take that to management and say, this is what we want to do. And management would start, of course, raising, so safety's already covered at that point. There's not, and then they could say, well, but I don't know if everybody would be okay. And Rickey could go, well, all the birdhouse already seems to think this is a really good idea. And it becomes a lot more difficult to say no from a management perspective at that point. So we really did, it's really, Cincinnati Zoo was just like the perfect storm of getting everything together in a way that, we weren't stepping on we weren't stepping on anybody's toes. It was like, okay, Rickey, I'm going to handle convincing the academic people, the non-zoo people, why this is important. And Rickey's going to grease the wheels within the zoo and make this happen this way. Right. And it was really, it paved the way for doing other, for future researchers as well, for them being able to do research at Cincinnati Zoo, which was another important component. So sometimes it really, I think that's, if I were trying to detail like an instruction book for how to outside researchers or new academic people that want to get involved in zoo research, how do you do this? Well, a big component of it is you get lucky. But another really important component is, I don't know what you even call that. Don't be too much of a jerk. That's part of it. Don't be that academic person. A big component, look, it would have been very easy, I think, to then just say, okay, Rickey, here's a proposal and this is what we want to do. And I know what I'm doing and we can just do, but instead it's, you know what, let me get to know everyone who's involved here. Let me make sure everyone's on board. Let me establish relationships with as many management as, Rickey and I were having meetings with Terry Roth. We were having meetings, everyone that we could have a meeting with at Cincinnati Zoo. By the end of the first summer, I think everybody at the zoo knew about our research, just about, and not, they knew about it because they were talking directly to us at the zoo. We were going around and just talking to everybody.
And Eddie's personable, right? He knows how to crack jokes and all that. That helps a lot, right? And people remember him. Oh, that's that funny guy, and we, I like him, I think he's funny. He makes me laugh. So that stuff goes a long way.
Yeah.
But just like they say, just being personable, and especially, I'd say maybe, especially then, maybe still now, zookeepers are kind of regular people, and you come at them too stuffy and you're going to turn them off. And you
Yeah.
kind of have to, especially when somebody
Absolutely.
is a researcher and he's coming in, if he's acting too serious, that will turn off a lot of people in the zoo
Yep.
field. You have to come in and not act like you got your head in the clouds at these people. And if you pull that, they have a lot of resistance they can offer at things. And you don't want people resisting you. And you have to come in and then bringing a lot of people together. Getting buy-in, at least enough of a like, let's give it a shot or let's give it a try from as many parties as possible.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that has to do with a lot of building some level of a rapport. And I think that's, it's just a lot of those kind of things doing. And I laugh a lot, Eddie laughs a lot. And then in between there, we're trying to talk some serious training stuff, right? So
Yeah. No, it really made a big difference of just being able to have those conversations in between then putting out the proposals. And then on top of that, and this was I like to point this out to other to people. Sometimes this is a case with behavior analysts or behavioral scientists in general that want to come in and do some work with an animal. Know as much as you can about both the species and the individuals that you want to work with when you're getting there. Like, you need to know. I mean, if you're it would have been very easy to propose a research project in this way and go, I don't know, I don't really care that much about penguins, but they'll serve as subject. I mean, this is something academic people do all the time. When you'll meet comparative psychologists, behaviorists, that the subject is simply a vehicle for their true topic of interest. So I'm interested in general reinforcement principles. And then you say, okay, well, what are you studying that with? Oh, laboratory pigeons. Okay. What can you tell me about pigeons? I don't know. We keep them in the lab. It's pretty. So you'll see stuff like, okay, are you familiar with their crop milk? Are you like, how much do you know about
exactly.
columbiforms in general? What do you know? And you see this, it becomes, you don't need to know those things in the laboratory. You absolutely need to know those things in applied instances. You need to know as much about the species and then the individuals. And so that was a big help too. But, Rickey and I would go in there and we'd be having lunch. We'd be meeting with these other keepers. We'd be meeting with management. And then at some point, I'm going to get tested a little bit, and I might get asked some question about, rockhoppers or king penguins or something, or mention. And the fact that I would know what they were talking about, that I would have a response. And sometimes it would even be at not just the species, but the individual level. And so I'd get something would get mentioned or something like that. Somebody would say something about Buddy and Maggie. And then I would respond. I would say, oh yeah, well, the two male Magellanic penguins, et cetera. And it was like, oh, he already knows
Right.
who he's working with, so that really goes a long way, as much as possible, to know the individual and the species. And I can't tell you, by the way, I say this as somebody who's been guilty of it time and time and time again, especially early in my career, where I would get asked to work with a species and I would know almost nothing about that species. And I just say, yeah, we can do stuff with that, and rush in to get something together. And it's like, wait, hang on. What do you know about the natural history of these animals?
Exactly.
I think everyone who's worked with animals has been in that position. I've definitely, I think there are keepers that have been in that position where it's like, well, I'm going to learn at the ground level because I just started working with cacomissals or whatever. It's like, okay. I think keepers are the ones that are most likely to be on top of learning about the species, especially they are also some of the people that are most likely to know about the species to begin with, because keepers, not surprisingly, are some of the most knowledgeable animal people out there.
Right.
That you can ask them just about anything about any random animal, and they know information. But that's really important as a potential research scientist to have that kind of background and be able to go into that. And as I mentioned, a big part of this, and that's a really what I've made a big part of my career about, is just trying to get some inroads going for things. So a big component of this too, when we were doing this stuff for Cincinnati Zoo, is this going to enable other researchers to be able to come in and do this research? So that was a big component of it too, was how do I set this up so that this is the precedent for how to do this? So now it's not just, okay, well, I got to do my research. I'm done with my research. See you guys. You're never going to hear from me again. Right. But how can I show everyone there, whether we're talking about at the level of directors, Terry Roth, at the level of managers, at the level of the keepers. So I should say not director of the zoo, but director. What is Terry's position now these days?
She's the director of research. She's in charge of our Center for Reproductive Endangered Wildlife.
Yeah. And Terry, yeah, she was a wonderful supporter of this research real early on. She really responded, that was amazing too, to have that connection of, hey, let me send you this, let me send you that, and then to eagerly get a response back of, this is really great. I'm glad to see what you all are producing here, even to this day.
Yeah, and so I was going to say, now that the relationship was developed and there's been success, now how has the zoo benefited in both for the animals and the zoo overall? What's been the result?
Well, so for one thing, obviously there's research that continues to happen, and it greases the wheels. So as of now, if I want to work on a research project, people know I've been through I'm tried and true. I understand how to navigate that stuff and whatever, and it just allows more to happen, and it's on both ends, right? So I learned how to navigate getting these things through. I start expecting I start trying to answer questions before they need to be answered by people that matter to approving things. And also you build a bit of a reputation. I would say it did help, I would say that, coming back from that ABMA conference, I won an award there, for example, right? So then I come back, bringing a little gold star for my institution, for my, for my zoo. And, they want to be supportive of that. You make your place look good. You go out and properly represent your organization. Then that just greases the wheel a little bit more and a little bit more. I think, fortunately, we have a very progressive zoo. And, we are willing to take some risks here and there, as long as it's calculated. And you can see that with a lot of things that we do. But, whenever you're being a leader of anything, you're taking the risks, right? So if you're being the first of anything, you're taking some risk. And so that, as long as you can try to intelligently navigate that, or, just be, make sure you're careful about it. I understand that, and I recognize that the zoo is trying to look good about some of these things, right? And obviously the ultimate goal of the zoo is to provide the best care possible. And I think it matters a lot that what we were doing, the goal of our research was animal welfare. I think that absolutely matters. When you say research, it can be anything.
Yep.
You have to make sure that you're clear. Here's the goal of this, right? It's something to do with animal welfare improvement, being able to plainly speak these things to people that may not understand. Anytime you're connected to any type of organization or business or whatever, you have swindlers coming along all the time with fancy words trying to get something from you, and that doesn't always work out well if they can't understand it. And you have to be able to plainly explain this to someone that may not be very familiar with a topic. And if, from a safety standpoint, I'll tell you personally, if I'm not familiar with something and then someone explains something to me in a way I can't understand, it's going to be a no, because the risk is pretty high if it goes wrong.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's pretty important. And you encounter this with people where they get upset with their supervisor. Well, I want to do this thing. And they say no. And you go, did you explain that to them in a way that they can understand? Because you have to do that. If they can't understand it and there's a lot of risk, they're going to say no. There's dangerous animals at a zoo and a lot can go wrong. And I think sometimes, especially younger people, they sometimes don't think about that, or they may understand it, but they're not the best at explaining it to another person. And you have to get good at communicating stuff to another human being in a way that you can get them on board. You have to convince them that the idea you're working on is going to be safe, it's going to be useful, it's going to be beneficial to the animals, it's going to be beneficial to the organization. And you have to cover all those bases. Sometimes you get to a stage where you can just do whatever you want, or mostly, and someone just goes, oh, I know you're going to cover those bases. But you usually have to prove yourself over time to get there. And it's harder for an outsider to just roll in there, which is why you got to have some type of liaison that you've built a rapport with inside to get that through. And, it's probably 50 big components that added to this success that we had to check all those boxes and continually manage them, right? Like you're managing relationships. I'll say what Eddie was talking about, knowing your animals. When I go to other departments and I'm helping them train their animals, I'm asking a lot of questions. Now, fortunately, I partially due to, going to AVMA, some of it from being at Zoo Academy, right? So I've been at Zoo Academy. I've worked in lots of areas in the zoo. So I have some proficiency with the animals here and the people. But me coming into a space, knowing something about the animals goes a long way versus if they have to teach me everything. But I don't come in pretending to know everything. I come in asking a lot of questions, and I mesh it with, you ask the right questions, people get an understanding that you kind of know what you're talking about. But if you don't pretend to be the expert, they understand that as well. So I always tell people, when I go into another area, I'll say I'm bringing whatever skills I have and information and abilities, and I'm going to mesh it with what you have. We're going to add our two, bits of expertise and shove it together and create this product, produce something good, solve some challenge. And, that's what Eddie and I were doing too, right? I met Eddie and we clicked personality wise. Eddie and I had lot of similar ideas. Eddie obviously knows way more from the research standpoint. I know very little, and I needed to rely on him to bring this together. But then he relied on me to bring up my end of the bargain from the zoo side. And then we, sometimes it's hard to get people to have that skill set together. But I think, I just wasn't born that way. Eddie just wasn't born that way. We have to work on producing that. The ability to communicate well and the ability to work well with people and to understand, be empathetic to other people's needs and navigate that. You're dealing with people in positions of power. You have to understand not to, step on people's egos in the, incorrect way. I know you know that, Barbara, working in a lot of different areas. I mean, it's just being diplomatic, at the same time being creative and
having sometimes that also equals having the right outlet to bitch, and that really does. I mean, there are definitely there are many times when Rickey and I walked away from some situation and we were just like, let's go to the bar, let's just go,
right.
let's have a beer and talk about how screwed up what we just had to deal with was.
Right.
And we had,
and you get back on the horse, right? The next day you get back on the horse and you come up with a strategy to resolve it, which is what all of it is, right? You're navigating some imperfect situation to try to ultimately create something, accomplish something, right?
It's all, you have to remember in all these situations too, and this is a really important component, especially from Look, at the heart of it, my philosophy is as a behavior analyst, right? So I'm coming at things from a very Skinnerian perspective. In many cases, I'm looking at the learning contingencies involved, and humans are animals just like all other
Exactly.
animals, right?
Yeah.
So the operant components of their behavior are still there too. They're working off of rewards. You should be using carrots as much as you can, right? You should be looking for what you can reward through social attention, through praise, through components of that as much as possible. And that's why the other end of this is, as you're getting that research done and you're doing it, and this is really important component for maintaining that research relationship, is once you get your foot in the door, you get the research done, you don't just sit there and go, okay, thanks, great, that was, see you later, bye, I'm out. Thanks for doing. If you want to have those relationships continue, if you want to get, and that's why I say, like, paving those inroads was always incredibly important for me, because I wanted to make sure that any future research that I would potentially do, as well as other behavioral researchers following me, could come in and do similar things. So as we were getting, as we were looking at results, as we were producing something from our research, I was showing that, hey, let's have a presentation. Let me show you, let me give you a PowerPoint presentation to the keepers, to the birdhouse, to the management. Let me, Terry, let's set up a meeting and I'm going to show you what we did. Let me send you this presentation that we gave, involve you at every level of this and keep you updated. And then on top of that, let's document some of the stuff that's happening post-study, because this is an applied behavioral study, meaning it was supposed to have improvement for the welfare of the penguins, what we did. So then that should mean that when our study's done, the penguins' lives still continue to be better. Okay, how's that going to happen? Well, the things that we did in the study using these devices, these hamster ball enrichment devices that Rickey was mentioning earlier, are they continuing to still be used? They were incredibly effective. And so we even had video from years afterwards. So we have, I think, even if you go to my ResearchGate profile, there's like 1.5, 2 years after the study, and then something like 5 or 6 years later, or so, I don't remember. There's a few video clips even of what it looked like after the fact and years down the road. In fact, I think you're still using are you right, Rickey? You're still using it with
Not,
the indoor penguin exhibit, something
not,
like it.
we still can feed them in the water. We're not currently using the hamster balls
Okay.
as of currently, but
Right.
it just kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit. But they
Right.
swim a lot, and we can feed them in the water, which was the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Right? You could throw food in the water and get them to eat in the water.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
also worth mentioning, since we're spending all this time talking about what the applied purpose was. We were trying to get penguins to swim more. That's at the end of the day, right? Right. So at the end of the day, that was our, that was our proof, that was our acid test, was
Right.
did we make the penguins swim more? So and the end result was, yes, we did. Under these conditions, we could now provide these particular discriminative stimuli to get the penguin swimming on command. So we could, here we go, here's a device, and all of a sudden in go 7 rock hoppers into a pool, swimming around in a frenzy, attacking these devices because it's producing the food. And that's post-training.
Right.
There's no longer any training anymore. Well, there's training, but we're not delivering the rewards ourselves. So
you don't have to stand there and deliver and take a lot of time from the keeper's day trying to get the animals swimming longer and longer. Yeah.
Right. And that was the post-training effect that we got. We were able to make enrichment actually be enriching for lasting effects. And the metric we had for that was increased swim time, and we got increased swim time. And these devices continued to be used. And then even years afterwards, like Rickey was using them for demonstrations of penguin swim, and other keepers were using them for demonstrations. And then I would go and,
Have that other factor of educational opportunities, and
right.
which is
Yes.
another part of our objectives in the zoo community. So
Yep.
Well, another interesting thing, right? So one of the goals of the zoo, right, is we have zoo guests coming, and they want to see penguins swimming.
Right.
And so when we were recording the interactions, we're standing in a public space, right? So people are coming by. I remember one time some little kid just like hugged Eddie for no reason. He was standing in front of the window.
because Eddie's so cute.
And they see us, they see Eddie and his undergraduate students there with the little Palm Pilots, what are you doing? And then there was always this opportunity to kind of explain we're doing some research to improve the welfare of the animals. And, that makes the zoo look good because we're progressive, right? So zoo guests are coming by, they see more than just, here's some animals doing some things. They're seeing that there is a process here at the Cincinnati Zoo where we are promoting a progressive attitude to their care, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
that's another component that I think we haven't talked about yet, is that there is a public, experience with what the zoo, right? How does the zoo look to the public? What are we demonstrating for people that support the zoo or who come to the zoo that we're giving animals the best care? And when they come there, are they happy with how they think we take care of animals?
Yeah.
And that some of this research is part of that, right? Not to mention you can come and see, right? So, that's another, just component of the whole thing, right?
Well, I was just going to say, and and one of the things that you shared not too long ago was a news story on how this work has continued with, so again, there's publicity as well to go along with this, and that how another aspect of it has been the water temperature, and how you've changed even the whole exhibits so that you can change the water temperature. And then there's also, you can explain it, obviously, you're there, but how they can see the individuals, and there's technology to see which individual is swimming.
Correct. So the story with Eddie, I tell you, I look back at my life sometimes and I'm really, really, lucky. Some of the way these things have played out for me. I've met a lot of really cool people. Because of Eddie, 2005, I met one of his undergraduate students who's now, she was just one of his undergraduate students, Dr. Katie Califoot, and she ended up moving to Cincinnati and came in similarly, said, hey, can we do some research here? And I knew her, right? So I met her at an ABMA conference and built a rapport with her, but through Eddie. And I said, so there was some time where we were being creative, thinking about some things. I had been to an AZA school, and I'd learned about at Disney, they were using RFID tags on their bee eaters to track where they went inside of each individual nest box.
Yeah.
And I thought, Dr. Katie came along and she's like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, maybe we could do some stuff with penguins. I'm like, maybe we can track our swimming time and it doesn't require a person standing around recording their entrances and going in and out of the water. And so it was a difficult task, right? Like, how do we come up with a system? And she looked into some RFID stuff and what it would cost. And she, did a lot of legwork to figure out how we could build our own equipment. Like, we could buy some main components, but construct an antenna that would read the RFID tags, which are on each bird, and we could customize it to our habitat. And so, and it ended up working out pretty well. I mean, again, when she showed up, thanks to the previous scenario, Dr. Roth, she met with Dr. Roth, she had to get that approved. And she, she told me, she was like, oh yeah, Dr. Roth said, oh, you're working with Rickey, then you're good. And again, that's because the way it's been paid, right? And so, and again, I safety's upmost. My reputation at the zoo is on the line whenever I do anything here. And obviously I've demonstrated over the years that is important. I'm going to cover the basis of safety first. And so, we worked on that, and it ended up being working out pretty well. We discovered a lot of interesting information. We collected a lot of data. It was a lot of hard work. I mean, we were learning how to build antenna. We were doing it a difficult way and then found easier ways. And there was one instance where we had built this antenna. We had the equipment going, and we were using it, like trying to get it to work in a room, and it wouldn't work. And we were hours and hours trying to get this antenna. It should work. And Katie comes back. She goes, they said, I talked to the RFID, our Oregon RFID experts, and they said that fluorescent light bulbs could disrupt the electromagnetic fields. So we go outside, and all of a sudden it works. And we had just wasted all these hours of frustration. So like you learn it along the way, right? Some of this stuff, right? And so, it was some trial and error and a lot of research figuring out stuff and that. But, what ended up happening is we built this into our new zoo habitats. And the zoo got a lot of, good public relations opportunities surrounding it, because it's the first penguin habitats in the world to be designed this way with the RFID system in it. And so, again, it's the zoo being progressive. This is 20 some odd years of research, off and on with penguins. And, it started with, me training our penguins to swim, and then bumping into Eddie, and Eddie going, this is great, but we have to document this in a scientific way.
Yep.
And then he legitimizing it, and then just continually to move this forward. So, I think it's super cool, like just to work on all these projects and meet these people and, come and do these things. And at the end of the day, it's all to improve the welfare of the animals, right? Like this is what we're doing for penguins. And so it makes it all rewarding for everybody, right? The zoo's happy. I'm happy. It's enjoyable to be a part of something, bigger than myself. And then, I'm meeting people along the way, and we're, providing some good in the world, right? So,
and I think important part of it too is the fact that you are publishing these things means that it also, and presenting on them at conferences, is that it gets out to a broader population and gets to benefit more facilities. It's just
right.
It's just not in-house.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it too. Is making it a point to go out and share what we're doing. Again, that represents the zoo well. And also it's just being a good steward to the community, right? If we're doing something really cool, we need to share it with the greater zoo community. And and again, I couldn't have done all this by myself at all, right? Like I have to learn how to collaborate with other people, or I had to be able to collaborate with other people to do these things. And, I've made a lot of friends. Like I met you many years ago, Barbara, and, here we are, I'm on your podcast. There's a lot of people I've met throughout the years. And, you have to build a rapport with people and build these friendships, and it leads to great stuff. I think, that's one of the things, is just getting out and meeting people, networking, and have some fun,
Yeah, I think I remember you all standing in a little corner in the hospitality suite at ABMA. I think that's where we all first met.
Oh boy,
Actually,
I don't know. The hospitality suites are mostly a blur at
always
ABMA.
dangerous. Always.
Yeah.
I don't think I met you officially, Barbara, but I know I remember seeing you at the first ABMA conference. You were.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's true.
So that's where I first.
We're going to take a little break to give you your first secret word. And the secret word is research. Research, research. Secret words are important to remember and submit to show you have listened to this podcast for your professional development. Certain podcasts are required for earning badges if you are a member of animaltrainingfundamentals.com. All right, back to the program.
All right, I do have another question. This is probably a good one for you, Eddie. Because I was thinking about the smaller zoo situation and
Yeah.
you know how you said that some of them might be easier to approach and work with, or they might be more, open to the idea. But they may think, oh, well, I don't have a big group of penguins. But one of the things that we know, especially in behavior analysis, is that you can do a study with one animal. Maybe you can explain how that works.
Yeah. So that's a really, it's something that I've written about quite a lot. I've published on quite a bit on talking about how behavior analysis itself does research, because I think what people are used to thinking about when they think about research is they're oh, well, we have to have enough subjects to run an experimental and a control condition, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what's typically thought of for between subject methodology or hypothetico-deductive methods. That's very, that is hands down the standard throughout all of the behavioral sciences, at least now, and has been for the past half a century, really. But what people often forget is that the way the behavioral sciences started, and all of psychology and most or much of psychology, much of the social sciences, because they were led by the behavioral sciences, and continues to be the case within behavior analysis, is what's called within subject methodology, where each subject functions as its own controls. So sometimes this is also called single subject research, not necessarily because there's only one subject, but because you only need one subject to be able to experimentally control all of the conditions. So people will talk about this in terms of reversal designs, an ABA or an ABAB design. There's various ways this is done, and there's a number of behavior analytic journals that are out there, including historically one of the earliest ones being the Journal of Experimental Analysis of Behavior, which really focuses on or it's got its start with doing a lot of within subject stuff, and now the main behavior analytic journal for applied stuff is the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, which continues to focus on within subject stuff. So that was a whole lot of words from a very academic perspective to say what I'm going to get at as a really important point here. When we are interested in the welfare of any animal, we are interested in the individual. So this is what some people will call the case study. And they'll sometimes erroneously refer to the research as, oh, well, that's a case study. Well, hang on, it's not, because there's experimental control, but let's not worry about that for right now. The point is, we're interested in that individual. All of applied animal behavior work, all of welfare work is ultimately interested in the individual, in showing an improvement in the individual. That's how we may look at the cumulative effect across that individual's lifetime or across a number of individuals altogether. But we are interested in, if we're interested in that application, the applied work, the practice of that is interested in the individual. So we need methods that match that at some level. And that's where within subject methodology really plays an important component, is because we have the ability to within subject methods to have experimental control. So to do proper studies at the level of the individual. So I can show you that, hey, I measured over a number of days how much this individual under a non-enrichment condition was spending time being inactive, was spending time engaged in, maybe some type of self-directed abnormal behavior, whatever we want to, a number of things that we would say are probably not good indications of welfare. And now I introduce some experimental condition for that individual. And so some intervention, some improvement, an enrichment condition. And I show that they become more active, they spend more time foraging, they spend less time inactive, less time engaged in stereotypies. And I can reverse that. And I can do that a number of times. So I could do a reversal design, or I could sit there and say, you know what, I have 3 subjects in this enclosure. Let me look at doing this across some different conditions with something like a multiple baseline design, or across the different individuals. I'm not going to go, there's a lot of different methodology, right? So I won't go into the details of that, but there is a century plus, I want to be very clear about that. Over 100 years of research methodology using within subject studies for proper experimental control. And sometimes that gets missed, I think, and it can be much more difficult to publish that research, especially independent of using inferential stats, but it is good experimental control. So we know that. I mean, going back to the works of Pavlov, Thorndike, Skinner, Harlow, all of these are very well-known individuals that did amazing work that was foundational for understanding the behavior of organisms. In fact, Skinner wrote a book called The Behavior of Organisms. And I like to point out that he didn't call it the behavior of these 6 rats. He called it the behavior of organisms. So he used within subject methodology on, I think in all of the behavior of organisms, it's maybe a dozen to 2 dozen rats. By the way, it's all rats, not pigeons, because that was pre-Minnesota when he started working with pigeons. So all that work came from Harvard. And so it was still when he was doing work with rats. So it has really important and well-studied, well-established methodology, and we can use that for understanding the welfare benefits of anything that we do to improve the welfare of an animal. I think that's really important. So sometimes you will hear that called a case study. It's not. I can't be any more clear about that. It is solid experimental control when done correctly. And that's all, at the end of the day, all you need is one subject. And that is particularly important for people doing work with, anyone interested in any component of applied animal behavior, from purely practice. You need to understand what's going on there, and we can use this. Also, by the way, this methodology is appropriate for purely practice purposes. So data is not just for publishing. It's not just for, hey, I need to show this to other scientists. It's, I need to measure, I need to document that what I did was effective. So that's where this becomes important as well.
For zoos in general, there's perhaps a lot of opportunity that maybe we haven't explored.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of where I was going with that. So, every time, as a consultant, of course, I'm presented lots of situations where people are looking for solutions. And of course, we're working through that. But every one of those might be an opportunity for somebody to do exactly what you're talking about there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really, by the way, I should say, so I use a lot of mixed methodology for a lot of what I do in research. And I pretty actively publish my research. So I have to cater towards, sometimes against my desires necessarily. It's, hey, I need to publish this, or I want to get this published here, or we're putting this in this journal. We need to apply this type of analysis to this study. But all of that said, so I use a lot of between subject methodology as well as within subject methodology. I use a lot of inferential statistics. I won't bore your listeners with what ultimately that all means, but that is to say that I do a lot of different things, and it serves it has its purpose. So a lot of times I think many people that only use within subject methodology fail to see how they could use other methodology as well. They kind of do the same thing that people who do between subject methodology do to their methodology, which is they go, well, I don't understand it, and therefore it must not be good. That's a really bad tactic in all of science, by the way. If you don't understand something, then you just don't understand it. So, okay, that's a great starting point. That isn't and not a starting point for saying, and therefore it's bad. A starting point for saying, okay, I just don't understand that. So let me leave it to that. But yeah, I often describe within subject methodology as it's kind of like being a left-hander in the world, in that you are certainly the minority. So I'm left-handed, by the way. So you have to be able, you should know about how the right-handed world makes you do things, right? Every left-hander has to do stuff that is not set up for people using predominantly their left hand to do things. By the way, it's only been half a century or so since people stopped trying to train left-handers to be right-handed. So it's crazy if you think about that. Only half a century or so ago, people were still actively, and probably in some parts of the world, I wouldn't be surprised, but certainly even here in the U.S. and other parts of the world, people actively, we have to exercise the demons of your left-handedness and make you right-handed. So this is how weird this stuff is. And it's still every left-hander knows the stress of like ink marks on your left hand. If you're old enough to have used pens to write out cursive or whatnot. So there's minor stresses you deal with. And that's kind of like being a within subject methodologist. You are experiencing a world that is not set up for understanding even what you do within subject methodology. So you need to be patient. You need to explain the benefits. And at the end of the day, everyone can understand, just as simply as I put it, that what you are interested in, if you want to improve the life of that animal, you are interested in that animal. Your sample size is an N of 1. That is what you're dealing with. You're looking at that one subject. So how can we know what we know about what's happening with any improvements for that animal? And that's where the interest is from a practitioner standpoint. That's what I mean about, okay, be a left-hander in a right-hander's world. Like be ready to explain that to somebody so that they understand a little bit about what it is you're going to do there.
So we did talk about, if a researcher wants to try and get involved with a zoo, but if after somebody listens to this podcast, if there is a zoo that actually wants to get in touch with somebody who wants to do research, what's the best way for those folks to maybe get in touch with a researcher? Do you think that's a reality? Might that be out there?
So we're talking about from both perspectives here. So the researcher that wants to work with a zoo, and the zoo or the people in a zoo or the zoo itself that want to have researchers work with them.
I'm thinking, well, we really already talked about the researcher that wants to get into the zoo. So now I'm thinking about the zoo that maybe says, you know what, we've got animals and we're interested in improving animal welfare. Maybe there's a researcher who would like to work with us. How hard is that for them to find somebody that wants to do, applied animal behavior type stuff?
Yeah, it's a little weird in that there's a lot more interest, I think, from an academic side in applied animal behavior. I know I've been doing this for a little over a couple decades now, and when I started, there was nowhere near the level of interest, I think, in people taking even research done for applied animal behavior purposes as seriously. Not so much, I mean, in agricultural work, it was fairly commonplace, but outside of that, it was less common for companion animals and zoo work. Outside of like a few areas. And now I think it's a lot more commonplace. So how do you get in touch? Well, the first thing I would say, how do you get in touch with some of these people is you can always feel free to shoot me an email and contact me. And I'm sure I might be able to help bridge some gaps there. So that's one easy way. But otherwise, there's a decent chance that there are people that have already contacted people from an academic standpoint that have contacted your facility, and pay attention to those people. Chances are, what you're going to need is either a really enthusiastic professor, or lecturer, professor here in the U.S., lecturer outside of most of the U.S., but similar thing, what most people are going to think of, some enthusiastic academician, or student for that matter, who has the resources to be able to come in and do that work. So finding that enthusiastic individual is really important. And as that individual, because this is the part that I don't know that we necessarily covered, I can't stress enough that there's going to be a lot of failure on your part, from the academic standpoint. I mean, just getting your foot in the door is, you have to be willing to sell yourself, and you're doing a little bit of kind of door-to-door sales approach to this. You're saying, hey, here's what I can do, here's what I would be interested in, this is what I like to do, and there's just going to be a lot of people that don't want to listen. There's going to be a lot of you're going to have to just keep failing to eventually succeed. I can't stress that enough. Also, for those research scientists, because I am incredibly empathetic to their failures, and trying to get their foot in the door with this stuff. There's a really great quote from The Simpsons, ironically, or not so ironically, said by Professor or Principal Skinner. I almost said professor there. So Principal Skinner says it to Lisa in, I think it's the Diorama Rama episode. And he says, every great scientist is part B.F. Skinner, part P.T. Barnum. So that's the quote. And I try to live my life a bit by that. So you'll hear me put out disclaimers occasionally where, I'll say the academic thing and then I'll stop myself and go, now let me tell you what I mean by that. So now I'm giving you a bit of the sales pitch. When I do that second part, I'm saying, let me stop. I just showed you I know what I'm talking about. And that I was talking to the scientists. And now I'm pulling people who aren't necessarily scientists aside and saying, let me tell you what the stuff I just said to scientists means. And let me explain that. So I've gone from B.F. Skinner to P.T. Barnum at that point. And it's a really important tactic itself, I think, for making sure people know you are covering both bases there. You're not leaving anybody in the dust. You've really got, you got to not just be the good scientist. You got to know how to talk about your science and sell the science to the people that aren't scientists. There's every zoo researcher, every applied animal behavior researcher needs to be able to be part P.T. Barnum at that level.
Yeah, I'd agree. That's how I met you. You were being P.T. Barnum, making me laugh. So I would agree with that sentiment. Should have
And
said
maybe-
that earlier.
I
Should've
was
said
gonna
that
say,
earlier in the
but
podcast.
Ricky's talking about me taking data in front of a penguin exhibit and these like kids coming up and trying to hug me. You know, if there was a kid like coming over and showing that level of interest and wanting to hang out with research scientists, I probably try to hand them like a data sheet or, hey, you want to take some data?
In all honesty, I mean, they are looking at you doing something that you are very interested in, right?
Right.
And
Right.
to be completely honest, the part of our brains that makes us want to do research and discovery is a childlike part of our brains, right?
Absolutely.
So I can see why children would be like, you're doing something you're really interested in.
Yeah.
And that looks fun because you make it look fun because you're really interested in it, right?
Yep.
'Cause you know you're interested in what we were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've probably seen me do that too, Ricky, where I've even in the middle of going through the zoo, we've been or doing the research and somebody comes up, and especially kids, I've just stopped everything I'm doing and I start talking to them because
Right.
they express some level of interest. And we've had kids do that where they show up and all of a sudden it's like, hey, you know, what are you doing? And I
Right.
just go, let me explain. And I start
Right.
showing them. And that's especially fascinating to see with kids. And Neil deGrasse Tyson actually had a comment that he said about this with children too, about, you know, he watched some parent and a kid where the kid was jumping in puddles and the parent stopped it, was like, stop doing that, stop. And he immediately said, don't, you know, like in his own brain, he just went, no, you know, you need to encourage that. That is that scientific interest. Exactly. It's cause and effect right there. It's kids jumping in the puddle, it's splashing, and he doesn't call it, I don't think, punishment in that case, but that's in essence what he's saying. You're verbally punishing that behavior, whereas, you know, that should be encouraged. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I joke about you know, pushing kids away, but but at the end of the day, I'm thrilled when I see visitors of any age, and especially the kids when they come up and they want to, like, they express some level of interest in the fact that I'm doing research there.
Right.
They are suddenly interested in that. I'll spend, I mean, they may regret asking me questions. I may tell them a story or two. Half an hour later, this kid's, you know, trying to run away. I don't want any more science in my ears. But, you know, nonetheless, I'll spend
or
time.
seeing penguins swim, you know, I mean, that's also the result of all that work. And
exactly,
you know, we do know that the animals doing things engages visitors more, and another opportunity to get them excited about animals. So
yeah.
So with that, we've been talking for, I think, an hour and a half, because I can see a clock on the wall behind Ricky.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah. Well, I think we got some talking in beforehand. Who, like, there might have been some stuff not recorded in there, but we've got there's a lot of conversation. I mean, I don't ever run out of things to say.
So I'll throw another thing quick, because Dr. Terry Roth came up a few times.
Yeah.
Funny, another interesting thing. So that first ABMA conference that I presented at, I actually had never used PowerPoint before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And she had approved me to give that presentation, to go to that conference. She was like very, very supportive. And she's like, do you know how to use PowerPoint? And I'm like, no. And she had some of her staff help me put together my PowerPoint and figure out how to do all this stuff. And then all the researchers at her building, she goes, when you get your presentation together, you can give your presentation to, we'll gather a bunch of people, you can present it to us first. And I'm like, oh my God, all these researchers said that. And then they critiqued it. And then I made some adjustments and ended up at ABMA. So, like, you know, if anything, I guess one of the things is just it's a lot of people that contribute to things. You never do anything in a silo, right? You're always, you know, there's just all these people. I could make a list of 100 people that somehow contribute to any success that I have. And it's always, he's working together with people and meeting people and all that stuff. And, little things like that. Like I forgot about that a little bit. Her name came up. Dr. Terry Roth came up a bunch of times. And, so yeah, it's just, I think networking and, that's a big part of trying to get through into a zoo. And yeah, I think stuff like this podcast might get people thinking about it more. I think this is a good platform to stir up some discussion, and maybe there's people that never considered going into a zoo and doing this, or maybe there's some people that work in a zoo or some management or keepers or whatever, it might go, yeah, maybe I should try to make some contacts with someone and try to see what we can do here. And so
Yep.
I think this is how this stuff gets done, I think,
Yeah. Yeah, no.
I think it's making me think, well, and maybe, I don't know. I mean, maybe I came into it with a different thought process, but I'm hoping that what people might do is think differently about behavioral research. I think the way that you both have been coming at it way before maybe anybody else was, is that we're looking at this as a way to improve animal welfare, and we're just going to do this really systematically, and we want to help everybody else see that as well. And in reality, this is already going on in your zoo, so let's just put a little bit more structure to it. And I think maybe if people who are working, whatever their facility is, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a zoo, but if you're just a facility that's caring for animals, you're already in this situation. And so
Right.
this really could be applied to what you're doing already, and has the opportunity to enhance what you're doing, put some structure to it, and then potentially be shared elsewhere, is the way I'm kind of seeing it based on what you all have been sharing today.
I would agree. I hadn't thought, until I met Eddie, I hadn't thought, I should get some researcher to come along and help me publish this. That was not something I was thinking about. So yeah, I think you're right. Just getting people to kind of think about it differently, because you're already doing the stuff. Anything I did with the penguins initially, it was not to publish it. It was very simply for day to day, improve their lives. It wasn't even to document it anyway. It was just like, I did the stuff, and then some people were like, this is pretty cool, you should share it. Okay. It was cool to me, but I didn't assume anyone else thought it was cool. And then more people kept thinking it was cool. And I'm like, well, I guess, and then it just kind of snowballed into other stuff,
Yeah, and adding the research component brings it to a whole nother level.
Exactly.
That level though too, Rickey, of also not just your innovativeness, but your humility with that too, was pretty incredible. And that was something that I really noticed early on, that I was like, yeah, I need to work with this guy, because not only is he doing really cool stuff with the penguins that, most people aren't really thinking about. So but he's doing this in a way that he's being incredibly humble about it too, that he's saying, yeah, whatever, I just want to make the lives of this animal better. And it wasn't like, hey, I want to show everybody that I'm doing this thing and look how awesome it is. And it was like, I just, if I get a penguin to swim more, then I did what I wanted to do.
Right.
And that was really, it was really, it was empowering to see that. So that was, and then having all the other, I can't speak enough about give enough kudos to Dr. Roth, and how really helpful she was, and interested at every step of the way of hearing more about these things and answering. I think over the past decade and a half, decade and a half plus, I think she's answered 100% of any emails that she's been involved with, often even very candidly, and just giving helpful information. That's been incredible. Cincinnati Zoo has just been wonderful too. And then to see things like that, with the kudos itself that are given within, it's really easy to miss some of that stuff. So just in the author note, all the research assistants are mentioned, including Dr. Califoot, who was a research assistant of mine, I think she might not have worked on the Penguin Project, so she might not be mentioned as a research assistant there, but she's mentioned in some of the other author notes of some of these papers coming out from Indiana. So I think she might be mentioned in the walrus or polar bear publications that I have from Indianapolis Zoo or lemur publications. If she collected data, she was involved with that. And now she, so Katie now gets to continue doing this work at Cincinnati Zoo and helping bridge more of that gap. So of bringing this research to more people. So that's pretty incredible.
Yes.
Well, guys, I think maybe we've got some ideas out there now to inspire some others, and you've laid the groundwork.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, no, it's very cool.
So hopefully inspiring. So thank you all for taking your time to share this story. It's exciting.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having us on. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is an important component of all this too, Barbara. So you definitely deserve kudos as well for helping get putting out so many of these podcasts and getting more and more attention to even things that I think not always get that much attention, like research.
We'll do it again.
Yeah, perfect.
All right.
Time for your second secret word. And the secret word is, of course, penguin. Yep, penguin. All right, let's get back to the program. Hey, do you like this podcast? I certainly hope so. It's free, awesome content about the coolest topics in the world, like animals, training, behavior, science, and the experts in these fields. The good thing about this podcast is the more this information is shared, the more animals benefit. The way you can help get this podcast to more people is by rating and reviewing it. A good review helps get it featured on searches. And guess what? Your good behavior gets noticed around here. We'll randomly pick a winner from all the reviews given to receive a free 1-year membership to the online education program animaltrainingfundamentals.com. And if you all are super participatory and do a lot of reviews, we will do this as often as 4 times a year. But if we don't get too many, maybe it's just a 2 times a year thing. We'll have to see how it goes. If you're not sure how to give a review, just go to animaltrainingfundamentals.com/podcast and look for the big green button for instructions. If you liked what you heard today, visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com for more quality content on animal training. You'll find courses, community, and extensive video examples from my consulting work around the world. We'd love to have you join our force-free family.